Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into the truly mind-bending ideas shaping our understanding of the universe. Today, we're asking a question that could entirely rewrite your perception of reality. What if everything you thought you knew about existence, the very nature of mass, the fabric of space, the relentless flow of time, even that, seemingly fundamental pull of gravity wasn't actually fundamental at all? What if these bedrock concepts actually emerged from something far, far deeper? Something that isn't just theoretical, but precisely measurable and, surprisingly, predictable. Today, we're embarking on an incredible journey, right into the heart of the unified coherence theory of everything, or UCTE. And this isn't just another physics theory adding a new layer to the puzzle, okay? It's a revolutionary framework. It suggests our universe isn't built from a collection of tiny particles and abstract forces. Instead, UCTE proposes that all of reality springs forth from the structured reduction of what they call a primordial unelectric coherence field. It's a complete reimagining of what reality fundamentally is, an entirely new ontology. And here's where it gets truly fascinating.
The starting point for this profound and all-encompassing theory, it's a seemingly simple mathematical identity that has genuinely baffled mathematicians for centuries. The Basel Series. It's the infinite sum of the reciprocals of the squares of all natural numbers. Imagine adding up 1 over 1 squared plus 1 over 2 squared plus 1 over 3 squared and so on forever. So that's 1 plus 14 plus 19 plus 116, and the answer. It elegantly converges to 2 fox milers and 7. Now, if you're like me, your intuition might be screaming at this point. How on earth does an infinite sum of perfectly rational numbers, the numbers that can be expressed as a fraction, right? How does that lead to a value involving coticus? That's the transcendental constant intrinsically linked to circles, curves, and the very geometry of our world. It just seems like a wild, almost cosmic mathematical coincidence. You'd expect something with TCAS to come from geometry, the circle, not just adding up squares.
Exactly. And what's truly intriguing here, and what UCT really hinges upon, is that this isn't a coincidence at all. This elegant convergence, this specific numerical outcome, it's considered a profound signature of coherence physics. In UCTE, each term in that series, each 1K type tree, isn't just a number. It's reinterpreted as a coherence eigenvalue. Think of it as a quantized, discrete contribution from a specific harmonic mode, like a unit of structured influence, to the overall curvature or resonance of a fundamental field. It's a direct mathematical imprint of how coherence inherently organizes and shapes reality. It reveals a kind of hidden harmony.
Okay, so if this mathematical puzzle holds such a deep secret, what does this all mean for us? What's the takeaway? Our mission today is to unpack exactly how UCTE takes this seemingly quirky mathematical puzzle, this beautiful Basel series, and uses it as a springboard. From this single identity, it proposes to redefine everything, from how dimensions and mass emerge to the very nature of quantum fields, gravity, and even time itself. We're going to explore the detailed mechanisms, the foundational axioms, and, the profound implications this has for our understanding of existence. Get ready for some serious aha moments, because we're about to show you how a radical new perspective can make even the most complex ideas surprisingly coherent, revealing a universe built on, exquisite harmony.
All right, let's start by truly understanding the Basel series within the UCTE framework and how it's far more than just a mathematical curiosity. Each 1Ki 242 term isn't simply a number in a sequence. It represents what we call a nested harmonic layer, or maybe a field shell within this overarching coherence field. Picture it like this. The Tate-Golub term, which is 112 and 2, or just one, right? That represents the base, most fundamental layer. This carries the strongest, most foundational influence on the coherence field. Then as toll increases to Taylor 2, the term is $14. This is the next harmonic. It contributes less in magnitude than the base layer, sure, but it adds a more refined, subtler layer to the coherence. It's sort of like a ring in a tree trunk, or maybe layers in an onion. And as Tel of dollars continues to higher values, Tel 233 dollars contributing $19, a Tel 43 giving $166, and so on. These higher modes contribute even finer, more nuanced details. They add to the overall coherent structure. Think of them as concentric field shells, each one adding detail, structure, or curvature to the whole. The sum just builds up the totality.
To really get a handle on this, let's stick with that music analogy you hinted at earlier, because I think it's perfect here. Imagine a complex chord, or maybe a rich orchestral piece. The bass frequency, that deep, resonant, fundamental note, it sets the entire tone, right? Then you have the overtones or harmonics, like the second harmonic, the third, and so on. These add depth, color, texture to the sound. They're subtler, perhaps, but absolutely crucial for the richness and fullness of the music. You need them. Higher overtones might be almost imperceptible on their own, but they contribute to the complete, structured sound, giving it its unique timbre. Similarly, in UCTE, these coherence eigenvalues, these 1K to 2 terms, they aren't just adding up arbitrarily. They're building a deeply coherent layered structure. The more notes or harmonics you add, the richer, the more precisely defined, and, well, the more stable the emergent reality becomes.
That music analogy really helps us bridge to the next crucial question. Why does this infinite sum of inverse squares converge precisely to pi 206 torrs? Traditionally, torrs is seen as a fundamental geometric constant. It's always given when talking about circles and spheres. It's just there in geometry, assumed. But UCTE proposes something radically different. Far more profound, actually. In this framework, the sum converging to pi 206 torrs is not a mathematical accident or some kind of cosmic coincidence. It is, in fact, an inevitable outcome because, as the theory states, the full coherent structure of a circular or spherical field builds itself from harmonic layers. The very area, or what we might call the curvature totality of such a field, isn't pre-existing. It is generated by the summation of these infinite harmonic layers. This brings us directly to what UCTE calls the coherence genesis equation. It formally states that caput sum qui 1 min t20. Here, lambda is our coherence eigenvalue, 1K 2022. What this equation reveals is a fundamental emergence. Haters isn't a primitive pre-existing constant that defines circles. Instead, it is derived from the layered contributions of these coherent harmonics. This implies that geometry itself, the very nature of circles and curvature, the way space bends and folds, doesn't come from imposed axioms or external definitions. It emerges dynamically from the harmonic layering of coherent fields. It's geometry from coherence, not merely described by it. This turns our understanding of geometry completely on its head.
Wow, that's a truly revolutionary idea. We're so used to thinking of pi as this unchanging fundamental property of circles. Just a fact. But UCTE suggests it's an outcome of these harmonic layers. So if I'm trying to visualize this, imagine an infinite series of concentric circles, right? But these aren't just any circles. Each one represents a harmonic field shell, and its influence or energy density is shrinking precisely by a factor of 1K2. So you have the first largest shell, then a smaller one at 14, the influence, then 19, and so on, fading into infinity. When you sum up all these infinite shells, they don't just stack. They generate a complete coherent structure, whose overall area or curvature is precisely defined by P. It's like watching a fractal build itself, but instead of just visually, it's energetically and geometrically constructing itself. The more shells you add, the more closely and accurately this harmonic convergence of coherence layers constructs the curvature we ultimately measure as Pi. It's like the universe is building its own shapes from harmonious resonance. Pretty cool.
Precisely. And this idea of distinct quantized contributions leads us naturally to the concept of coherence eigenvalue ladders. Each lambda 1K22 is a specific coherence eigenvalue, a discrete and stable contribution from the Tarrant harmonic mode. This means the coherence field isn't just a smooth, undifferentiated whole. No. Instead, it's structured into a ladder of coherence modes, where each rung of the ladder represents a stable ident state within the overarching coherence field. These ladders are more than just conceptual tools. They potentially represent discrete resonant shells, intricate dimensional folds. Think about how a piece of paper can be folded multiple times to get layers, or even fundamental quantum levels of curvature, kind of like an electron's energy levels in an atom, but applied to the very fabric of space and field. We can even formalize this with a coherent spectrum operator, which we denote as lambda, lambda 2, lambda 3. This is basically a mathematical tool that models its crucial role in dimensional emergence, the construction of nested curvature, and the very fractal harmonics we see in cosmology. It's a fundamental mathematical tool to describe how these discrete layers of coherence build up all the complexity we observe, from the smallest particle right up to the largest cosmic structures.
That's a powerful idea, the universe constructing itself in these discrete harmonic layers. But okay, what if this isn't just about circles and geometry? What if this principle extends to even more fundamental aspects of reality, like dimensions themselves? Does it go that far?
It absolutely does. The Basel sum, as profound as it is actually just a special case. A single point, really. It's just one specific value in a much larger, more generalized mathematical landscape, the Riemann zeta function. This function is defined as zeta for zeta. The Basel sum is simply zeta 2 dal. But what does this generalized parameters mean in UCTE? That's the key. In our framework, S is interpreted as a coherence compression index. We call it the dimensional coherence operator, and it essentially maps harmonic indices to field compression gradients. It tells us how quickly the contributions of higher harmonics diminish, which, as you'll see, relates directly to the emergence of dimensions. The interpretation of these different values of S is truly illuminating, I think. For instance, if S is of Ditter1, the sum zeta diverges. It goes to infinity. In UCTE, this represents logarithmic field coherence or infinite spread. A state of uncompressed, boundless coherence where everything is maximally diffused, basically no defined structure. When in 222, as we've discussed with the Basel series, it gives a circular or radial coherence linked to pi 2/2. This is where the field has compressed just enough to define stable two-dimensional structures. Now, if we move to S303, we enter the realm of volumetric harmonic coherence. This is crucially linked to mass condensation and the emergence of stable three-dimensional resonance structures. Our familiar 3D space. At C4 we find connections to space-time shelling and the intricate curvature tensors that define the geometry of the universe beyond simple volume. And as S approaches infinity, the coherence dampens so rapidly that it implies a coherence collapse into singular localization, essentially a point of pure, unspread coherence, a singularity. Thus, the zeta function, when redefined as inti lambdax, it directly encodes what we call dimensional unfolding. It governs the total coherence convergence for any given dimensional index. Each value of S defines a specific way coherence bundles itself, giving rise to distinct dimensional properties.
That's incredible. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this means dimensions aren't just fixed, external things out there that our universe happens to exist within. They're dynamic, emergent properties of how coherence fields compress and resonate. It's not like the universe in 3D. It is 3D because coherence resonates in that particular S3 way. That's a huge shift from how we normally think about space.
Exactly. It fundamentally changes the ontology of space. And now let's focus on a particularly intriguing value. It's known as Apry's constant, approximately 1.20206, just an irrational number, mathematically speaking. But in UCTE, this isn't just another abstract number. It's interpreted as the total coherence of a harmonic volumetric field structure. Here, each coherence shell's contribution is damped at a cubic rate, 1K through 33, rather than the quadratic one, 1K or 2, we saw for area. This specific cubic damping models mass-like distributions, volumetric entanglement fields, or quantized volume generation. Essentially, it describes how coherence condenses to form something that occupies space and has a certain density or substance to it. This leads us directly to a crucial mass-volume coherence equation. M0, M0. Let's break that down. M0 is a fundamental coherence mass unit. Think of it as a quantized value, maybe tied to the Planck scale or even the tiny neutrino scale, the smallest possible chunk of mass arising from coherence. And zeta itself becomes the mass-volume coherence attractor. It precisely defines the harmonic saturation point of any three-dimensional coherent field. It's like the maximum mass-like density a 3D coherent structure can naturally attain through these harmonic layers.
That implication is truly profound. Okay, let me see if I'm getting this. Just as pi 226e6 describes the emergence of geometric area from layered coherence, Curvature describes mass emergence via volumetric harmonic convergence. So mass isn't just stuff. It's a specific kind of structured coherence condensed in a 3D way defined by this zeta value. This framework must have enormous potential for explaining things that are still mysteries to us, right? Like dark matter.
Absolutely. This framework is incredibly versatile and powerful. It can be applied, for instance, to understanding the structure of dark matter halos, those vast invisible structures holding galaxies together. Instead of some exotic particle we haven't found yet, dark matter could be a specific form of highly coherent, volumetrically structured field governed by something like zeta principles. It could also shed light on the condensation of neutrinos and even provide a coherence-based cosmology, where the distribution of matter in the early universe is explained by these volumetric coherence attractors, these natural convergence points. And building on this, we can extend the analogy to coherence mass quantization. If coherence shells define geometry, why not mass too? By analogy, mass could be quantized into shells where men k equals men k, well, sum k 1k, 1k to 2, where dollars is that fundamental coherence mass unit. The total mass mallar would then be the sum of these shells, mcagla 170 nt pi 26 sissons, or perhaps using a different power for different types of mass. This structured way of deriving mass could directly describe how mass condenses from underlying coherence fields, providing a rigorous explanation, potentially, for observed mass hierarchies in particles. Why an electron is so much lighter than a top quark, for example. It's a comprehensive view of mass, not as a brute fact, but as a result of coherent layering and its specific mathematical signatures.
So we've explored how fundamental mathematical constants like the pile and Serio, TU, and 3 can reveal the emergence of geometry and mass from these coherence layers. Pretty amazing. But how does the universe build stable, beautiful structures, from seashells to galaxies in the most efficient and harmonious way. Is there an underlying principle of optimal structuring within this coherence field? Some kind of cosmic design principle?
There is, and it leads us to another profound constant, the golden ratio, the URL, which is approximately 1.618. This ratio is famous, right? It appears in recursive growth patterns and self-similarity throughout nature, from the arrangement of seeds in a sunflower to the spiral arms of galaxies. In UCTE, chiral is interpreted as the natural scalar of recursive coherence propagation. It represents the ideal balance between expansion and resonance within a coherent system, achieved with minimal energetic loss or interference. It acts as the optimal coherence step scalar, ensuring that each successive layer or iteration of coherence resonates harmonically with the whole, avoiding destructive interference and maximizing constructive efficiency.
That's truly fascinating. So this concept of optimal structuring applies across all scales. Can you give us a few examples to really drive home how this optimal coherence step scalar actually manifests? Like, where do we see it?
Certainly. Think about spiral resonance packing in radiating systems. We see this in the arms of spiral galaxies, yes, but also the arrangement of leaves on a plant stem or even the growth patterns of certain shells. The golden spiral, which is built directly from the golden ratio, acts as a structural attractor in these systems. It minimizes local incoherence, allows for incredibly efficient energy propagation, and recursively preserves crucial phase relations, ensuring the system remains stable and coherent over time. We can even model coherence shell spacing in such systems as 3 OBR$C2F type, where $2 is some initial radius, it's a direct geometric consequence. Or consider recursive field construction, a Fibonacci-like buildup of field strength, where CK plus 1 with CK1, that sequence naturally optimizes toward ratios of fire. It's like it's encoded as the attractor of coherence intelligence, guiding growth in the most harmonized way. This innate structural optimization is formalized in axiom I-P2 of UCTE, which we call the golden mean resonance stability law. This axiom states that systems with coherence ratios aligned with UPIs exhibit optimal stability, resonance reinforcement, and negentropic coherence flow. The term negentropic here means it tends towards order and structure, rather than dissolving into disorder or chaos. This incredible property stems from phi being mathematically the most irrational number. Its unique mathematical quality prevents perfect phase overlap between layers or iterations. It avoids simple, repeating resonances that could become destructive. This allows for maximal constructive interference while meticulously avoiding those destructive resonances. Its continuous fraction expansion is maximally divergent, meaning it distributes coherence in a quasi-fractal, non-repeating geometry that's just ideal for layered resonance preservation.
So it's not just an aesthetic principle we find pleasing, but a fundamental law of how coherent systems maintain their integrity and evolve efficiently. It prevents the system from getting stuck in a simple repeating pattern, allowing for complex, self-similar growth instead. And you see this everywhere once you start looking, from the spacing of atomic orbitals, the precise twist ratio of DNA, to maybe even the phase coupling of brainwaves. And of course, the stunning structure of spiral galaxies. The golden mean isn't just pretty, it's a fundamental principle of coherence itself, ensuring sustainable emergence across all scales.
Exactly. And moving from optimal structure, we delve into how this deeper reality then gives rise to the distinct forces and particles we actually observe. This involves what UCTE calls hypersymmetry reduction and toroidal pathways. In UCTE, hypersymmetry isn't just some larger symmetry group we haven't found yet. It's defined as the pre-reduction total coherence field prior to gauge emergence and dimensional projection. Think of it as a metasymmetry, the state of undifferentiated total coherence where all possibilities are held in a unified, unmanifested form. Pure potential. Now, traditional physics often views symmetry as being broken, like a perfectly symmetrical vase shattering, which leads to disorder and the emergence of distinct forces from the pieces. UCTE proposes a more elegant, structured process. Resonant unfolding rather than violent rupture. This unfolding occurs along specific coherence-preserving geometries. Toroidal pathways are key here. These are topological phase-preserving structures that allow symmetry reduction to occur without incoherence collapse. Imagine a donut shape. It's a closed loop, right? It maintains its integrity even as it twists and turns internally. These pathways are like closed-loop coherence circuits. They maintain global phase integrity even as they guide coherence compression and differentiation. They are symmetry-preserving manifolds that ensure internal logic is maintained throughout the whole process of reduction. Alongside these toroidal pathways are golden mean pathways, which govern recursive scaling and optimal coherence transfer using that phi principle we just discussed. They ensure that as layers emerge, they maintain structural integrity with minimal destructive interference. Fire acts as the tuning constant of coherent asymmetry. It allows the system to modulate outwards and differentiate itself while preserving its internal symmetry signatures, preventing total collapse into chaos. Together, these toroidal and golden mean pathways form the coherence gradient manifold. This elegantly unifies both linear coherence fields, like those rational progressions and eigenvalue ladders, and nonlinear coherence fields, such as recursive structures and golden spirals. The central claim here is profound. Hypersymmetry reduces along toroidal and golden mean pathways. In this way, symmetry and asymmetry, linear and nonlinear relationships are maintained. This is a fundamental departure from the idea of violent symmetry breaking. It proposes instead a structured, coherent emergence where nothing is truly lost, only transformed and differentiated in a very specific, ordered way.
That's a powerful idea. Our fundamental forces are essentially echoes of a deeper unity, structured echoes rather than just arbitrary outcomes of symmetry breaking. Could you perhaps walk us through how UCTE envisions these forces emerging from a single coherence field rather than being separate entities? This leads us to axiom point 2, right? Gauge symmetries as asymmetry residues.
Absolutely. In traditional physics, gauge symmetries like U1, SU2, and SU3 are seen as fundamental internal symmetries that define the forces and interactions we observe. Electromagnetism, the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force. But UCTE reframes them completely. Here, they are derivative asymmetry structures emerging from hypersymmetry reduction. Each observed gauge group is essentially a resonant snapshot of a broken but coherent mode of the original hypersymmetry, a specific way that the underlying coherence field organizes itself when it differentiates or cools. We can visualize this as a nested reduction cascade. Hypersymmetry doesn't just shatter randomly, it reduces through a structured sequence, maybe like a complex crystal forming layer by layer. A toroidal phase partition could lead to the emergence of U1 symmetry. That describes electromagnetism and a single resonance axis. Think of a simple, stable rotation or phase cycle. Then a golden symmetry bifurcation involving phi might give rise to SU2 symmetry, associated with the weak interaction and binary phase resonance, a slightly more complex twofold rotational symmetry, perhaps. Finally, recursive dimensional shelling could lead to SU3 symmetry, which governs the strong interaction and ternary coherence domains, a threefold, even more intricate symmetry pattern.
What's truly revolutionary here, I think, is that this means the fundamental forces we observe in the universe aren't just arbitrary laws or independent entities. Instead, they're the structured fracture points, or specific resonance domains of a deeper, unified coherence. It's not about separate forces interacting, but about different, distinct ways a single foundational coherence expresses its reductions and differentiations. It's like seeing the same underlying melody expressed through different instruments, playing different parts of the harmony. This shift in understanding, from fundamental forces to emergent coherence patterns, it really sets the stage for a radical reevaluation of some of physics' greatest mysteries. Let's now dive into one of the most fundamental questions, the nature of mass. What is it really in this picture?
That's right. In the traditional view, the Standard Model explains mass as particles acquiring it through interaction with a universal scalar Higgs field, which has a non-zero value everywhere in space. The Higgs mechanism. But UCTE offers a radically different reframing mass ontology. Here, mass emerges from the structured loss of coherence as hypersymmetry reduces. Each particle's mass in this framework reflects the depth of coherence reduction required to produce its specific gauge-locked identity. How much coherence had to be given up to form that particle? Mass is seen not as an intrinsic property or an external interaction, but as a residue of resonance decoupling, a scalar coherence loss gradient locked to field asymmetry. We can model this with a coherence selection function, maybe something like $d equals first PO, where Ms represents a specific gauge level or dimensional compression index, and P is some power of coherence selection. This illustrates how deeper coherence reductions, higher S values for the gauge levels, seem to lead to more mass. This gives us a powerful mass emergence equation. 1 equals is $m on COS day, where in dollars is the total coherence mass potential of the initial hypersymmetric system before reduction. So mass is inversely related to the coherence retained. Let's look at some examples. For U1, electromagnetism, maybe says all is very high, C is close to 1, so the resulting particle has essentially no mass, giving us the massless photon. Makes sense. For SU, weak interaction, perhaps two tellures. Coherence is medium, leading to the high masses of the W and Z bosons. For SU3, strong interaction, maybe 2L's coherence is lower still, even smaller, resulting in the moderate masses of gluons, though confinement effects add effective mass within hadrons, which is a complication. This means mass isn't created out of nothing, it's what's left over when coherence reduces and structures itself into specific force patterns. It's almost like a measure of incoherence density.
Okay, that's a radical departure from the Higgs mechanism we've all become familiar with, especially since the Higgs boson was found. How does UCTE address the experimental conformation of the Higgs boson if mass is primarily a residue of coherence reduction? Does the Higgs just disappear in this theory?
That's an excellent and crucial question. No, the Higgs field doesn't disappear in UCTE, it's reinterpreted. It has a role, but maybe not the one we thought. The Higgs field is not the sole origin of mass, as traditionally understood. Instead, within quantum coherence field theory, QCFT, which we'll get to, it's identified as the first scalar harmonic in a much larger ladder of scalar fields. Particle mass, then, isn't just a coupling to one field. It's a superposition of couplings to different scalar harmonics, expressed mathematically as the Lozer-Popp, Sumkal, Lang, Fink, Wrangle, were coupling constants to these different harmonic modes. So the Higgs field, Fink field, is simply the lowest energy symmetry-reducing scalar harmonic. It's responsible for influencing the largest mass gap, particularly for the W and Z bosons, exactly as observed at the LHC. That fits. But crucially, higher harmonics, Fink for key UVA legends, are responsible for explaining the intricate mass scales of fermion generations, like electrons, muons, and tallest having different masses, and potentially the incredibly tiny masses of neutrinos and even various dark matter mass windows. This framework provides a potentially more natural, coherent, and far more comprehensive explanation for the diverse mass spectrum we observe, without needing to invent arbitrary fields or ad hoc couplings for every particle group. This advanced model utilizes a mass coupling matrix, let's call it alpha, of coherence coupling coefficients. This matrix aims to explain fermion and boson masses without resorting to the arbitrary Yukawa couplings found in the standard model, which have always felt a bit unsatisfying. For example, electrons might couple strongly to Phi-1, while muons couple more strongly to Phi-2, and tellus primarily to Phi-3, explaining their increasing masses across generations in a structured way. Neutrinos, on the other hand, might couple predominantly to very high no modes like Phi-4 or 6-3-5, which would naturally account for their incredibly tiny masses and distinct properties compared to charged leptons. Even quarks, with their strong interaction confinement, could couple significantly to Phi-3, which we might understand as the QCD confinement mode's scalar component. This matrix approach provides a predictive and structured way to understand mass origins, rooting it firmly in the coherence field's harmonic structure, not just arbitrary parameters.
Okay, moving on from mass, let's turn our attention to gravity, another fundamental force, or maybe not, that still holds many secrets. How does UCTE rethink gravity? Is it still space-time curvature?
Well, axiom I.1 defines hypergravity, the scalar coherence curvature. It's a bit different. In traditional general relativity, gravity is described as a spin-2 tensor field, a geometric warping of spacetime itself, which is treated as a four-dimensional manifold. UCTE, however, proposes that hypergravity is the scalar coherence curvature of the omnilectic vacuum. It's not a force mediated by gravitons, nor just geometry. It's the fundamental underlying substrate itself. Its curvature is gravity. It is the residual curvature of the coherence field after layered symmetry reductions, a pervasive fundamental curvature that exists even before mass or other fields emerge from it. This hypergravity field, which we can denote G because it can depend on position and direction, is directly linked to the scalar harmonic fields, the fields that we just discussed for mass. Specifically, it's the limit behavior of these scalar harmonic fields as null goes to infinity under conditions of infinite coherence condensation. Essentially, as all these scalar harmonics combine and condense, their ultimate collective curvature is what we perceive as hypergravity, the ground state curvature. This leads to a profound, unified curvature axiom. Mass curvature, space-time curvature equiv. They are the same thing, just viewed differently. Both mass and space-time curvature are simply different expressions of coherence, condensation, or gradient. Mass is seen as localized coherence reduction, sharp, dense in the coherence field maximum. Space-time curvature, in contrast, is the distributed coherence gradient, the smooth, overarching gradients in closure chaos that guide motion, extending out from those dense. So a heavy object is just an intense local drop in coherence, and the surrounding curved spacetime is the smooth gradient of that drop spreading out into the field.
Now let's tackle one of the greatest mysteries in physics, maybe philosophy too, the nature of time. Traditional physics really grapples with paradoxes like the perceived flow of time, its irreversibility, the elusive now, and why it fundamentally differs from spatial dimensions. What does UCTE offer here?
UCTE offers a potentially profound resolution to these centuries-old issues through axiom I.3, time as internal coherence phase accumulation. Time in this framework is not an external axis like in relativity or a fundamental universal parameter ticking away. Instead, it is a vector field emergent from the internal phase accumulation of coherent structures within a stabilized 3V coherence field in Finsler phase space. Okay, that's a mouthful. Let's break that down. Formally, time tau is defined as an integral. Here, tau represents the accumulated coherent phase along a stable flow path, gamma, within the system. This implies several key things that directly address those paradoxes. First, time only exists where coherence persists across a 3V resonance structure, that is, three orthogonal coherence flow vectors that define our observable space. If there's no stable 3D coherence, there's no defined local time. Maybe time doesn't exist everywhere. Second, decoherence, collapse, or phase misalignment leads to local temporal fragmentation, time freezing or jumping or multiphasic branching. Whoa, this could even mean quantum timelines diverging. This explains potentially why time seems to flow only one way, because phase accumulation is generally unidirectional within a stable system, and why the now is so elusive, it's merely the present phase state of your local coherent system, not universal. And critically, the illusion of a global timeline is the byproduct of large-scale, stable coherence, where phase accumulation is broadly synchronized across vast regions. Time is thus revealed as potentially a local, emergent phenomenon, an internal clock unique to coherent systems, rather than an external, universal master clock. This ontological definition of time directly leads us to a mass-energy-time relationship within UCTE. Instead of EPC22 being just an empirically observed equation, it naturally emerges from coherence physics. Here, energy dollars expressed as nabla-du-C22. Let's interpret this. Mass dollars is understood as the localized coherence gradient, how sharply coherence collapses in a region. Energy dollars is the phase flow rate through the coherent field, essentially how quickly the internal phases are changing, related to Nabla-Curie. This is multiplied by the coherence phase flow speed squared, which is analogous to the speed of light c. And time is the integrated phase accumulation along a path. This unifies mass, energy, and time as different interconnected aspects of the coherence field's dynamic properties, all rooted in how coherence structures and flows. This redefinition also clarifies things like inertia and gravitational acceleration. Inertia is simply the resistance to altering a coherence gradient. Makes sense, right? It takes effort to change the pattern. Inertial motion, like an object moving at a constant velocity, occurs when Cx is x dot dollars. The coherence gradient remains uniform and undisturbed along its path. The object just rides the undisturbed flow. Acceleration, then, isn't caused by an external force pulling or pushing. It happens when mech Cx eps xx. This indicates a disturbance or change in the coherence gradient, forcing the coherent phase flow to change its path or rate. Gravitational acceleration specifically is not about space-time curvature in the traditional GR sense, but it works similarly in its effect. It's a deflection of resonance phase flow along coherence curvature gradients. The force experience is actually just the spatial coherence gradient. 5 billion partial C, partial C. So gravity is a pure coherence gradient action. It's not a force mediated by a field particle like the graviton. It's an inherent property of the field itself. Things follow the downhill slope of the coherence field.
That's a brilliant way to simplify what we perceive as gravity. It's not a pull, it's a flow. This means that what we perceive as orbital motion planets, circling stars, maybe even electrons orbiting a nucleus, is actually the result of stable coherence phase loops forming around a coherence gradient center. It's not a distant force pulling, but an intrinsic realignment of phase flow within the coherence field, creating a stable resonant path that just keeps cycling. Neat. Okay, so if mass, gravity, and time are all emergent properties of a fundamental coherence field, what does this mean for the weird and wonderful world of quantum mechanics? How does UCTE reimagine the very fabric of quantum reality? Does it get less weird or more?
Probably different weird. It leads to what we call quantum coherence field theory, QCFT. In this revolutionary quantum framework, the scalar coherence field is elevated, or promoted, to a quantum scalar operator field. This is the fundamental substrate of quantum reality, meaning that even at the smallest scales, reality is described by fluctuations and interactions within this quantum coherence field. Crucially, quantization itself arises naturally from coherence eigenmodes. It's not an artificial imposition like in traditional quantum mechanics where we just sort of declare things are quantized based on observation. Here, quantum levels are interpreted as phase coherence wrapping numbers, essentially how many stable phase rotations or loops occur within a localized coherent structure. It's topological. Particles themselves are seen not as fundamental points, but as localized coherence condensates, phase excitations, or even chiral coherence vortices, tiny swirling knots or patterns of coherence. A single particle state is represented as Wirtz-Wrangle and Dagger-Wirth-Wrangle, where the Wirth-Weislet-Wrangle signifies the fully coherent vacuum state, the ground state devoid of excitations. A dagger creates a coherence pattern. The dynamics of these quantum fields are governed by a scalar coherence wave equation, maybe order 60, where dollars is a coherence Laplacian adapted to the Finsler coherence metric. This means the field moves and changes according to its own complex internal geometry, rather like how ripples spread across a pond, but in a much more intricate path-dependent way because of that Finsler nature. This approach also profoundly redefines fermionic coherence fields and spin. Fermions, like electrons and quarks, the matter particles, are not merely scalar entities. They emerge as coherence aligned to spinor fields arising from chiral coherence bifurcations. This means their intrinsic spin structure and their particle identity are tied to localized coherence phase rotation, like a tiny self-contained vortex in the coherence field with a specific twist. Chirality in QCFT reflects the directionality of phase coherence rotation, left-handed or right-handed twist. For instance, the weak force's exclusive coupling to left-handed fermions, a well-known experimental fact that's always puzzled physicists, is explained because its phase field specifically resonates with positive winding coherent structures, while it simply doesn't see or interact with negative winding ones. It's a resonance match. This can be formalized by a coherence-Dirac equation, something like E gamma mu nabla mu Cisai MCCSE. It describes these chiral resonance fields propagating through coherence gradients, much like the original Dirac equation describes electrons, but now rooted explicitly in coherence and its gradients. Similarly, coherence gauge fields interactions are transformed. Gauge fields, which mediate the fundamental forces electromagnetism, photons, the weak WZ bosons, and the strong forces, gluons, are now understood as vectorial coherence phase condensates. Different kinds of coherence flows, their gauge symmetries are simply resonance phase alignment symmetries. Not abstract mathematical groups imposed on reality, but the natural ways coherence can align and resonate. Electromagnetism, weak and strong forces are different phase coherence torsions, or twists within the Finsler phase space, different ways the coherence field can be stressed or patterned. Interactions, therefore, occur as phase coherence overlap or gradient interference. Scattering events, like two particles bouncing off each other, are simply temporary phase realignments of their coherence patterns. And binding, like electrons held in an atom, is the formation of phase-locked standing waves within the coherence field, a stable shared pattern.
So even something as perplexing and frankly spooky as quantum entanglement, where particles seem to be mysteriously linked across vast distances, that must have a coherent explanation in this framework too. How does UCTE interpret entanglement and conversely decoherence, the loss of quantumness?
You're absolutely right. Even quantum entanglement and decoherence gain new clarity, potentially, through the lens of coherence. Entanglement is redefined as coherence phase locking between spatially or temporally separated condensates. Entangled particles aren't mysteriously communicating instantaneously faster than light. That was always weird. Instead, they simply share a common coherence phase eigenmode, a single, unified phase pattern that extends across any distance between them. They are two manifestations of the same underlying extended coherence pattern, like two ends of the same string vibrating together. Measuring one just reveals the state of the whole pattern. Decoherence, then, is not merely random environmental interaction measuring the system, as often described. It's localized coherence fragmentation, a breakdown of phase continuity across the condensate. It's the loss of this structured phase connectivity, causing the unified quantum coherence to dissipate and the system to appear classical, broken into separate pieces. All of this culminates in the quantum coherence standard model, a potential replacement for the standard model we have now. Here, the standard model symmetries times SU2 times SU3 are seen not as fundamental but as resonance fractures of a higher unified group, which UCTE tentatively labels E6 addercensus. E6 census is a known large exceptional Lie group. Hypersymmetry is the overarching metasymmetry of undifferentiated total coherence, pure potential. E6 census is its first structured shadow after an initial resonance condensation, the initial differentiation from pure coherence into something with structure. This leads to a cascade. Hypersymmetry reduces to E6 senses, then perhaps further differentiates into SU2 senses, sensi sexti, then into SU5 sensi. These are groups explored in grand unified theories. And finally, reducing to the familiar SEC times SU2L times U1Y of the standard model. Each step representing a specific phase bifurcation or resonance reduction, like a crystal forming facets. This model aims to precisely map all known particles and forces onto coherence interpretations. The photon, for instance, is seen as a minimal phase twist in the U1 stellar field component. The WNZ bosons are a phase-locked SU coherence triplet arising from a binary phase resonance structure. Gluons are strong phase color flows in SESU3 Solar, representing the complex patterns of the strong interaction. Fermions, as we said, are localized phase condensates or chiral coherence vortices. The Higgs boson is simply the first scalar coherence reduction mode, responsible for the initial mass differentiation by setting the scale for the lowest harmonic. And gravity, as we discussed, is the coherent scalar curvature field itself, the background upon which all these patterns form. This framework offers a potentially truly unified emergent understanding of the quantum realm, where all particles and forces are simply specific patterns and twists within this universal coherence. It's all one thing, behaving differently.
This is truly a comprehensive reimagining of reality, from the smallest quantum fluctuation to the largest structures. So if everything from particles to forces, mass, and time emerges from this coherence field, how does this grand theory explain the universe itself? How does UCTE approach cosmogenesis, the birth and evolution of the cosmos? Does it replace the Big Bang?
To understand the grand scale of universal emergence, UCTE replaces classical spacetime entirely with what we call the Finsler coherence hyperfractal phase space, denoted PCX. This isn't just a different geometry. It's conceived as a fundamentally new ontological substrate for reality, the ground of being, if you like. Its key features are crucial. It's Finsler, meaning it incorporates direction-dependent metrics. This allows for anisotropy and path-dependent structure, meaning the distance or connection between 2 points can depend on the path you take, or the direction you're facing relative to the field structure. This is a much richer geometry than standard Riemannian spacetime, which assumes uniform direction-independent measurements everywhere. It's coherence-based, as its metric structure directly derives from coherence gradients, so where coherence is strong or weak or changes direction, the geometry itself is defined by that. It's hyperfractal, meaning dimensionality isn't fixed at 3 plus 1. It dynamically emerges via fractal reductions, allowing for complex, self-similar structures across scales. And it's a phase space directly combining phase, which relates to time and energy, and spatial geometry, X, thereby integrating energy, motion, and curvature right from the outset. In this phase space, dimensions themselves are defined as dynamically emergent coherence vectors, not static, pre-existing axes. Each dimension is a stable coherence flow vector, a stable direction in which coherence can propagate without collapsing.
So it's not just a backdrop for the universe, but the very, very fabric of reality itself, defining space, time, and even the rules of interaction. Wow, that's a mind-boggling thought. The stage is the play.
It is. It's a deep ontological shift. This dynamic definition leads to axiom the third, point 1, dimensional emergence as phase thresholds. The core principle is that dimensions emerge when coherence curvature develops critical directional independence, when flows can happen in new, stable, independent directions. It's not a sudden appearance, but a cascade of emergence, maybe like water freezing into ice in specific crystalline patterns. It starts potentially from a 0D omnilectic singularity, a state of pure, undifferentiated coherence with no curvature, no directions yet defined, just potential. When a first critical threshold is met mathematically, we might say some curvature tensor component like C-psi phantom myoseeds of value delta 1 life. It triggers a single coherent phase flow vector, marking the emergence of 1D, a line of stable coherence. A subsequent directional curvature bifurcation then allows an orthogonal phase flow to stabilize, creating 2D, a planar sheet of coherence. When a 3-vector independence condition is met, a full spatial coherence volume emerges, giving us our observable 3D space. The fourth dimension, what we experience as time, is conceptualized as a phase flow layer. It emerges when a phase accumulation condition, DCD tau neck, is met within that stable 3D structure, leading to phase clocking, the internal time flow we discussed earlier. It needs a stable space to flow in. Beyond these 4, nested curvature variation within the phase space gives rise to hyperfractals. These are interpreted as internal degrees of freedom, like spin, flavor, and color charge. They are akin to extra dimensions hidden within the fabric of our observed reality, rather than being external, curled up, Kaluza-Klein type spaces.
What's truly insightful here is that space and time are not merely empty containers or even just geometric properties of a pre-existing manifold. They are dynamic expressions of coherence layering and flow. This also means that what traditional theories might call extra dimensions aren't necessarily compactified external spaces we can't see, but rather internal resonance phase sheets within the coherence field itself, giving rise to the properties of particles. That feels more integrated.
Exactly. This framework then outlines a coherent cosmogenesis, also part of axiom D.1. The universe doesn't necessarily begin with a singular Big Bang point exploding into pre-existing space. It starts, perhaps, as a pure omnilectic coherent state, where there are no gradients or curvature, no structure yet, just pure uniform coherence. A critical perturbation, maybe a quantum fluctuation or some inherent instability, then leads to the first resonance fracture. This is where the first coherence vector emerges, seeding dimensionality, the first crack in the perfect uniformity. This then leads to a cascading layer formation where 1D, 2D, 3D, and 4D time dimensions, along with hyperfractal internal dimensions, stepwise emerge in a structured sequence as the fracture propagates and stabilizes. Mass energy structuring follows this dimensional emergence, with local coherence gradients condensing into mass and energy emerging from phase flow rates. Symmetry emergence happens as phase groupings stabilize global resonance fields, giving rise to the U1, SU2, and SU3 symmetries we discussed earlier, like patterns forming in the cooling field. Gravitational emergence sees massive coherence condensation curving surrounding fields. Gravitation is the inertial structure of coherence curvature, the large-scale shape of the field. This entire universal evolution could potentially be governed by a universal evolution master equation, something like chi Vc plus hat Vc plus hat Vc. This would describe the internal evolution for all coherent systems from the universe as a whole down to the smallest particle, all driven by coherence dynamics.
And underpinning this entire epic process from singularity to stars, there must be a fundamental law of conservation, right? Something has to be conserved. Is it coherence itself?
Yes, absolutely. That's axiom IV.1, conservation of coherence through resonance structuring. This core principle states that the total coherence of the omnilectic field is conserved. The overall amount of coherence never changes. Structure doesn't arise from creation ex nihilo or destruction into nothingness. It arises through discrete coherence reductions, where coherence is redistributed, rearranged, never truly destroyed. It's like rearranging the same amount of Lego blocks into countless different structures. The bricks remain. This explains an emergent structure cascade that begins from the simplest forms and builds up complexity, starting from particles, fermions, bosons, which are simple coherence patterns, building up to atomic orbitals, molecules, cells, and organisms, and ultimately perhaps to consciousness, civilizations, and the vast cosmic filaments that span the observable universe. All levels built from rearranging the same fundamental coherence.
This is a truly profound implication, if you really think about it. Every single atom, every star, every living organism, and maybe even every thought you have, is ultimately a structured coherence resonance, a temporary pattern in this field. It's a continuous process of redistributing but never destroying the fundamental omnilectic coherence that underlies everything. We are literally made of patterned coherence, constantly flowing and rearranging. That's a perspective shift. #outro. Okay, let's take a deep breath and unpack this for a moment, because that was quite the journey we just took. We started with a quirky mathematical problem, the Basel Series, right? A seemingly random link between infinite sums and circles, pi squared over 6. And we ended up with a framework where mass isn't a substance, space-time isn't a passive backdrop, gravity isn't a force pulling things, and even time isn't a universal clock ticking away. Instead, everything we experience, every particle, every interaction, every dimension, is an emergent property, a structured gradient, a precise resonance, a dynamic collapse pattern, or an accumulation of phase within a single primordial coherence field.
What we've discussed today, the unified coherence theory of everything, or UCTE. It provides a singularly powerful and, I think, compelling framework. It seems to be the only known framework currently proposed that accomplishes several critical feats all at once. It aims to unify gauge symmetries dynamically, reinterpreting them as coherence phase condensates rather than fundamental separate groups. It integrates hypergravity not as an external force, but as the fundamental scalar coherence substrate itself, the ground state. And it potentially connects all known physical interactions to a single, elegant process. Coherence reduction via resonance condensation and dispersal. This isn't just another theory, it's potentially a complete ontological shift in how we understand existence itself, what reality is. So if all things are merely gradients of coherence within a unified hypergravity field, as the theory suggests, What does this imply about the nature of your own consciousness, your thoughts, your very sense of self? Are they, too, simply complex, hyperresonant coherence patterns within this grand, evolving field, continuously flowing and reshaping themselves moment by moment? Something to ponder.
The deeper you dive, the more questions emerge. And that's exactly what we love here on The Deep Dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep searching for the coherent patterns that might just underpin our reality. We'll see you next time.